two things can happen if you do this incorrectly. Number one, you're going to miss the indicators of deception and potentially get manipulated. This could lead into fraud. It can lead into scam. It can lead into making a really unhealthy decision to trust people. Or you can start to see deceptive indicators in a truthful person. And the person that you should have trusted and should have hired or signed on to a contract with, you don't, because you assume that they crossed their arms and they avoided eye contact, that they weren't being honest. And they were. Had you baselined them, got to know them a little bit, you would have understood that's what they normally do. And when I say normally, it's repetitive and it's something they do when they're relaxed. That's that baseline.
Welcome to the Communication Secrets Podcast with your host, Angela Podolsky, international keynote speaker, behavior analyst, and nonverbal communication expert.
Welcome to another episode of Communication Secrets. We are excited to have you here. We are grateful for you coming back each month to listen to our new episode with our guests that are coming on the show. And we're really grateful for all your feedback. Today, we have another incredible guest with us, Lena Sisco. Her resume is beyond incredible, and I will let her share her story with you. I am personally very excited to have a conversation with her and share the incredible knowledge and the superpowers she has with you. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. You made me feel so special.
Please share with the people that don't know you, maybe a minute about yourself and the story. How did you come about to do what you do? And the story we all like to hear.
Yeah, which was no planning at all, totally unintended. Years ago, I wanted to be an archaeologist. It was my dream job to become Indiana Jones. So I got my master's degree from Brown University. I got to dig in Italy and Greece, and I was an archaeologist. And then something was missing. Fast forward a couple months, got my degree. I didn't have a job. And my dad was like, you have to get a job. You have to move out and pay some bills. So I had a friend dare me to join the military. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, instead of being Indiana Jones, you can go and be James Bond. And you can join the Navy intelligence program that I did. And you don't have to go full time. You can go part time and they will pay you. So I thought, oh, what the heck? I literally did not even think about it. Went to a Navy recruiter and he said, well, you have to sign up for 6 years. I was like, okay. And I signed up. And so crazy decision, one of the best ones I ever made in my life, because it just led me on this journey that, again, I had no intention of. I did not plan. It fell in my lap. And it's something that I'm so grateful for because it was exactly what I was put on this earth to do. Fast forward, I'm in the military now, and another opportunity comes up, and a commander asked me to join this very new special program called IPW, Interrogation Prisoners of War. And he said, we're going to have a bunch of Marines come and talk to us today about this program. It's the first time that they're allowing females and your low rank to join this training. So I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be one of the first females and challenge myself. But when I heard the Marines talk, I was like, oh, this may be a little bit out of my league. I don't think I'm cut out for this. So I said no. And that night I got so upset with myself because I said no to a challenge. And, we have challenges all the time in our lives that we have no idea what they're going to turn out to be. And so I thought, you know what, if I fail, it's okay. But let me just try this. It sounds fun. It sounds like an adventure. I love adventure. So let me just see what happens. And I went back the next day on drill weekend and I said, sir, sign me up. I'm ready to do it. And he's like, are you sure, Seaman Sisco? And I said, yes. And then, of course, fast forward, it ended up being the most challenging training I've ever been through, even more challenging than getting a master's degree. And it was only technically 3 months long. And then after I got trained, I thought I have this really incredible super skill that I'm never going to use. Who the heck am I going to interrogate? There's no war. Like, this is back in 1999. There's no, there's no conflict going on. There's nothing. And I'm like, where am I going to use this? And then I got commissioned to an officer, and I found myself on 9/11 and in my school. And as soon as I was on break and I was watching the planes hit the Twin Towers, 20 minutes later, I got a phone call saying, pack your bags, you're going to war. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's been 2 years since I was trained. We practice and, keep up the skill set. But I thought, I'm going to use this.
This is real. Yeah.
Yeah, this is real. And I thought, whoa, am I prepared for this? And then 6 months later, I was down in Gitmo. And while I was in Gitmo, I learned so much valuable information about humans, about psychology, about human interaction. And I started playing with these techniques that I found to be super successful, building rapport, gaining trust, getting the truth. And I just started building upon this method I was creating. Now, fast forward to today, I train all of the law enforcement, both federal and state in the US, in this method. And it's super effective. It's rapport-based. It's non-accusatory. It is a recipe of ingredients to perfect that human interaction. And as you said, it all comes down to a conversation. And it's knowing how to have that conversation to create a safe environment for people so they feel comfortable with you to tell you the truth. Because sometimes that truth is embarrassing. Sometimes it can be incriminating. Sometimes it's really hard to say. And, sometimes it's going to land us in jail with the people I talk to. So how do you create this environment where this person feels so comfortable around you and they trust you so much that they would rather tell the truth? And so that's really what my technique is based on. And here I am today. I'm the CEO of 2 companies. I wrote a couple books, give a TED Talk, and I train and I keynote speak.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And my head is going in so many different directions. The first direction was the beauty of your story and you leaning in to a place of unknown and being there. And as myself working with a lot of salespeople, executive and corporate, what I notice when they go into a meeting, they are so caught up with what did that need to be done? What do they need to sell? What they need to say? The problem with it, when I have a conversation with them, is that they missing opportunities they may not know that are there because they're not sitting in their silence.
Absolutely.
And I think the beauty with the story that and the journey you went through is that you allow that silence and that journey take you to places that you never even knew. And I think that's true even in business. When we take a step back and listen to what's happening around us and let just, some people will call it energy, some people look at the linguistic part, some people look at the opportunities. Sometimes we don't hear the one word from our client that maybe will get us to not the 5K contract, but the 100K contract. Yeah. And if we always in our heads and not in the silent, as I mentioned, you then lose that opportunity to hear that. And you heard that. You were there in that moment.
Yeah. And, in all my trainings, I always start with the core first ingredient, awareness. And it's just that. It's quieting that voice in your head that says, what am I going to ask next? What do they think of me? Blah, 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 blah. If you are so focused about this conversation you're having in your head, you cannot be present for the conversation you're having with another human. And so it's quieting that voice and it's opening up the aperture, I call it, to really take in both modes of communication. That's the verbal and the nonverbal. And when you do that, you get a sense of people's personality preferences. You get a sense of what makes them comfortable. You get a sense of what motivates them and persuades them to want to sign a contract with you. But if you're not aware, you're going to miss all of that. And the conversation can go nowhere. and you can be out a good client.
Yes, 100%. And you know what? I'm thinking about the way I prepare for this podcast and interviews, or even when I go meet a client or I'm in a high stakes situation, and usually it's negotiation of businesses and things like that. I look at who they are and try to identify. So for example, before we met, I will look and see who you are to identify what is your superpower, so I can have that conversation and know what to talk about, and maybe a little bit of your background, so I know where you're coming from to be able to connect. But then I really stop there, because then we can sit down and have that conversation and taking us and flowing to wherever it needs to be. And if you sit in silence, I have this image in my head that I sometimes paint. It's like arrows. Think about arrows going from me to you, right? So if I'm sitting in silence, then I can receive your errors. Like you said, the channels of communication, I can receive them. But if I have errors going to you as well, then we're just shooting at each other constantly. And those errors going, and they're leading us nowhere. So we're just shooting at it, you know? So,
yeah.
But I think what I'm trying to say, over preparing, if I would over prepare to this conversation, I would not be able to sit in silence. What do you think about how should people prepare for meetings? What are maybe strategies they can use?
So, and I used to prepare for all of my interrogations, and I still do interviews today, which are criminal based. And I've gone on a couple of TV shows to help some cold cases, and I have to be prepared, right? But you don't want to prepare to the point where it becomes detrimental, to the point it hurts you, and you become so focused or tunnel visioned on your plan that you miss everything else that's going on around. So when you prepare, I like to run through a couple of things, and I'll start with, okay, here's how I'm going to build rapport. That is paramount. That's first. I got to get to know the person first and get them to like me and trust me. That's rapport. So if you can't establish that and really work at that, everything else is not going to fall into place. Like, you have to do that first. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't really have time to do that. Do you have a minute? Do you have 2 minutes? Because that's all it takes. It's so incredibly easy. And there's a couple of things that are really great. The similar to me bias and having something in common, instant rapport, right? Showing interest in a person, being genuine, instant rapport. So that's number one. What do I want to talk about? Number two, maybe it's one topic, maybe it's 5. And so when I look at that and I think of the topics I want to segue to, now I start thinking about how I'm going to bridge that conversation to those topics. Number 3, do I have to ask some specific questions to make sure I get the information I need to make an important decision? And if so, I'm going to write them out so I don't forget them. Number 4, wrapping it all up, revisiting that rapport and ending on a good note so that person loved the conversation and wants to talk to me again. So that's really like the whole encompassing of how I prepare. Mm-hmm. And when I get into the conversation, I have this guideline or an outline, but I'm flexible because I'm talking to a human. I don't know where that human is going to take the conversation. I don't know what they're going to say or how they're going to respond yet. I may have prepared for it and thought of the what ifs that I train my people to do, right? What if they say this? What if they want that? What if they ask you this? What if they're unwilling to have the conversation with you? What are you going to do and say, right? So prepare, but be flexible and in the moment. And when you can really concentrate on that person, look at them, listen to them, not just hear them, but really listen to them, you're going to get all the information you need out of that conversation. So yes, prepare. Think of how they're going to respond to the things you're going to say. Think of the specific questions that you need to ask to get the pertinent information you need to make the decision. Think of how you're going to build rapport and gain their trust. And when you feel good about that, you're going to walk into that conversation with confidence.
Beautiful. And I think one of the beautiful words that you kept using is that flexibility. Yeah. And that air in between, right? Because, for example, I came into this business because my main mission is helping people connect by having conversations. How do I help people connect better and really understand each other? And if there's no that flexibility, you cannot connect. It just becomes not something that you hearing or you understanding, and there's no connection and no business, no interaction, no friendship, no community, not even war. 9/11 did not happen without community. It doesn't matter if it's for the just or for other reasons, or maybe in their head it is just, that's another conversation, but that did not happen without connection. And that's crucial. And I think to emphasize what you're saying is that you need that flexibility, because if you just coming in there and you bombarding them with what you need to do, it's just a one-way street.
Exactly. Conversations aren't one way, right? And the thing is, I can't go into a conversation or negotiation thinking me. It's all about me and what I want. That you're not going to get anything. You've got to put yourself in other people's shoes and just consider how they're feeling, what they want, what's going to make them feel good, what they're willing to give up if it's a negotiation, right? All of this stuff, consider their point of view. And also consider how you are coming across. If you don't take 2 minutes out and think of how you're coming across verbally and non-verbally, which is your tone of voice, your rate of your speech, your body language, your facial expressions, your gestures, right? How you're sitting, how much you're talking, because sometimes you have to change that with different people to make them feel more comfortable around you. So it's being self-aware. How am I coming across? What am I putting out there? Because that's going to really make or break that comfort zone.
Yeah, I love it. We are so on the same page. It's crazy because companies hire me, and I'm sure you've seen that too in your area. Like, we want to learn how to read people. Just teach us how to read people. And then I walk in and I talk about emotions and bias and timelines and all of that. And I spend the majority of my time talking about that. Mm-hmm. And they're like, why are you talking to me about it? And the whole part of understanding how to read people starts with self-awareness and understanding emotions. Because what are you reading? What I tell in my sessions, I say to them, look, you're learning gestures. You're learning to understand gestures, but you're not learning how to read people. Because learning how to read people, you're reading emotions and you're reading their relationship to how they think and believe. That's what you're reading. So if you don't know how to understand emotions, their timeline, how they function, the relationship to thinking, and all of those things happen, you are not able to read people. And if you're not able to understand yourself, then on top of it, you're contaminating everything that is happening. So all those books, I always say, and maybe I'm a little bit too extreme and too direct, but that's my Israeli personality. I say, you have books that tell you cross arms mean reserve and this gesture and take 5 steps. I see it on TikTok, 5 steps to know if this person is lying. You take that, you throw it into the garbage, because it means it does nothing to you.
No. And I tell people too, I'm like, if you, all right, yes, you can go read a book on body language. I wrote one, but you will never be able to read people like that, because you are so right. It's so many levels beneath that. You can say one gesture, crossed arms, like you said. It can mean my hands are cold. It can mean I'm trying to hide my belly fat and I'm just self-conscious of that. It can mean I'm closed. It could mean I'm defensive. It could mean I'm really paying attention. So I'm keeping my hands from flailing all over the place. So how do you know which one is right? Because you got to read a million other things at that same time. You have to listen to the words they're saying. You have to figure out their personality preferences. You have to understand their motivations, their needs, their wants, or the inward focus, outward focus. And so when you get that whole big picture, now you can say, the crossed arms are because they're trying to concentrate, not because they're defensive. And so there are tons of layers. And I'm sure you get this. When people find out that we read body language, we assess, right? Body language, they will lean into me and say, so what am I thinking? I'm not a mind reader. I wish I was, but I'm not a mind reader. So I assess all of this information coming to me about who you are, your emotions, what you're feeling right now, your personality, what I just see, what you've said, and I put together the big picture. It's a recipe of ingredients. It's not one thing.
Yes. My favorite is when you have a conversation with a person for 5 minutes, let's say it's a networking event, and then they ask you what you do, and I tell them what you do, and they say, well, what do you think about me? How do I do?
I get
I'm
that.
like, okay, you're doing well. Let's have a glass of wine. All good.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the perception in our world, and I think the gift of the media, when I started this, most people were not aware unless they are high executive in sales and they had to study this to go to the next level. Mm-hmm. Most people were not aware. So I think the gift of the media is that they brought our work forefront and brought it to the public. And now people understand what communication is, that there's more to it than just the linguistic part that they learn in school. But then the downside with the media and the Hollywood situation is that they teach people how to do things in the Hollywood way, which sells shows, sells books, but is not the real world. As if people see the Cinderella, that's not how life is.
Yeah. Right? And, when I teach this, I tell people 2 things can happen if you do this incorrectly. Number one, you're going to miss the indicators of deception and potentially get manipulated. This could lead into fraud. It can lead into scam. It can lead into making a really unhealthy decision to trust people. Or you can start to see deceptive indicators in a truthful person. And the person that you should have trusted and should have hired or signed on to a contract with, you don't, because you assume that they crossed their arms or they avoided eye contact, that they weren't being honest. And they were. Had you baselined them, got to know them a little bit, you would have understood that's what they normally do. And when I say normally, it's repetitive and it's something they do when they're relaxed. That's that baseline. People like to get that a little confused. But it's how do people look and sound when they're comfortable? How do they look? How do they sound? That's the only thing you have to figure out. And when that look or sound changes, something has changed in them. And it could be an emotion. It could be a feeling. It could be a thought. It could be a million things. But because we're not mind readers, the only way we can find out the information of what changed and why is to ask questions about it. And then maybe sometimes we can't ask a question because we don't want to come across as too pushy and aggressive. So maybe we have to find out the information in a different way. And so it's really going back to relearning our conversational skill set to validate the change in what we saw and what we heard.
Yeah. Oh, great stuff. Again, my head goes in 50 directions, but I'll try to stay on point for our listeners. And what I want to dive maybe back a little bit is the message of awareness. And how important self-awareness is. And I often find, and it's not their fault, when people are in certain jobs, they want to get things done fast. And they learn tactics on, for example, how to read people, or they learn technical skills as well, but they don't invest as much in the self-awareness aspect as well. When we're growing up and in schools, we are not taught how to even do self-awareness. I had somebody come to me and said that I thought I'm doing self-awareness because I attended those sessions and I heard it and I listened to it. I was thinking that I was doing it, but the reality now I understand that I was not doing it at all, because attending a seminar is not doing self-awareness. And unfortunately, none of us are taught how to do self-awareness, quotes unquote. So how do you find, and maybe the question is, what are the things that you see that becoming an obstacle for a person to get to their next level of the self-awareness and being open and actually doing the work of self-awareness that needs to be done for them to be able to read others?
Oh, gosh. So I tell people this, and it's so simple. If you feel insecure, you look insecure. If you feel a little condescending, you're probably being condescending. We know how we're coming across, but sometimes if we don't like that, we push away that thought, right? We get an honest gut feeling of how we're portraying ourselves every single time. And usually it's how we are portraying ourselves. To get to that level of self-awareness, you have to do a deep dive. And that really starts with your personality preference. Our personalities come from our DNA, right? They come from our genetics and they're passed down through us. And they also come from our environment. And so when we really can understand about our preferences of how to handle change, of how to make a decision, how do we sound and look when we are stressed, all of that. I do MBTI. I love MBTI. Some people don't like it. Some people do. There's DISC, you have Ocean. There's a million personality assessments out there. Do them. And they're free. You can go to 16personalities.com and take the MBTI for free and find out about yourself. And when you truly understand yourself and how you communicate verbally, non-verbally, how you think, how you make decisions, how you organize your life, it all becomes crystal clear. And I have a good story that I write about in my first book because I had a student come up to me, and I thank her to this day because she had the courage to give me some constructive feedback as her lead instructor. So I was running a 10-week interrogation school, a certified Department of Defense members to interrogate, and they were going overseas. And so my whole goal was give them this skill, make them awesome so they can be super successful overseas and stay safe. And at that time, I had multiple courses running, super high tempo, very stressed out. Well, the more stressed I became, the more ingrained in my personality preference I became. So I became a really hardcore J and a T, right? I'm a thinker and a judger, meaning a thinker, I make decisions based on fact and analysis. I kind of keep people out, which is, it's not good. It's not bad. But that's what I choose to do. There's a time and place for that. And then as a judger, I'm get super organized. But to the point of I become very inflexible. And if I have a schedule, it cannot change. Okay. So while that happened, the way that my personality was coming out was I was insensitive. I was stubborn. I didn't care about the students, but in my heart, that's all I did care about. But I didn't communicate it. And is it their fault? No. Whose fault is it? Well, it's not really to blame, but the thing is, because I know that I have to make the change and I became more aware of me, it's my job and my responsibility to notice when I'm becoming too directive or too organized or too inflexible and change it and work on that. And so she came back with this feedback, and it was a hard pill to swallow. But that day, I learned everything about myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, it all makes sense now as to why people may feel that I'm this way and I'm truly not. How would they know? They're not me, but the way I'm coming across makes me sound really insensitive. I can change that. I definitely can work on that. And so then I spent the next few years doing all this research and et cetera on it. And I started really focusing on that. Learn yourself, learn everything about yourself, because that's going to help you become more aware of how you come across in certain times. And especially when you're nervous or you have that big client meeting or you're stressed out, that's critical because you really need to be on your A game. And so it's just becoming aware of like, oh, I can change this one little thing. I can change my thought to say, I'm calm. I have this. I feel really good. I'm going to connect with this person. And it can just change the whole outcome. But yeah, that awareness about who you are and who you become when you're very stressed is key.
Yeah, I totally relate to your story because I had a similar moment where it slapped me into awareness, where I moved from Israel to Canada, and the communication styles and even the humor and the interaction are extremely different. Extremely different. And I also have a Russian background, and the Israeli and the Russian are a lot more close. They are very direct, they're very blunt. The humor is very sarcastic. That's part of life. And also the spacing is closer. And if you tell somebody, let's go for a coffee, and they tell you, yeah, let's go for a coffee, you are going for a coffee with them. Today, tomorrow, you are going for a coffee. When I moved to Canada, I realized that everything I'm doing is not working because I had no friends whatsoever. I couldn't connect to people. And I'm all about connections. If I don't connect, I don't feel good. I love the connection. And I'm like, what is off? And that awareness piece came similar to you. That was my gift in this scenario, that I had to start realizing what's happening, what are the differences? Because when a Canadian will tell me, let's go for a coffee, they just say it to say it. Unless they give you a time and a place, they're just like, yeah, let's go for a coffee. They don't mean that necessarily. It's a thing to say. And in their minds, it's politeness. But in other cultures, they may perceive it as rude and lies and things like that, right? That people is not truthful. But it's just different dynamic. And also the spacing and animation, I really had to check in with myself every conversation about how am I communicating? How much hand gestures am I giving? How much politeness or impoliteness for the Canadian version I'm giving, because you don't have the same amount of percentage of politeness that you need to do in other cultures. In other cultures, you don't need to do as many thank you, please, sorry. You hit a wall by yourself, you say sorry to the wall. So for me, that was my awakening. I have a question for you about when you work with individuals, do you notice, quote unquote, the fear of self-awareness?
Yes. Just like what I said, hard pill to swallow. Sometimes we don't want to know the bad about us. We don't want to know the things we can work on because it's going to chip away at that pride and ego. None of us wants our pride and ego chipped away at. That's how we protect ourselves, right? If my ego and my pride are here, I'm protected from the world. So I don't want to hear anything that I have to work on or that could potentially cause, something negative, because that means that's going to chip away at that little protection barrier that I have. But it's so not like that, right? It does the exact opposite. It just makes it stronger. And we become so amazing at our communication skills. And so I think just getting over that hurdle of thinking the thoughts that if I hear something that I have to work on, or if I hear that I'm not as good of an instructor as I thought I was, right? And I need to make changes or work on whatever, instead of thinking, I can't hear this, I can't do it because that's going to make me drop that protection guard I have, embrace it and think that guard is going to become 10 times stronger. And the day that that student had given me the feedback, it wasn't immediate. I'm going to say it was a few years after that. I actually started embracing all of my mistakes. I was like, yep, screwed that up. Well, I'll have to try that again. I'll rethink this conversation. And I started getting so comfortable with accepting all my faults and mistakes that I loved it. And then years later, I morphed it into like self-deprecating humor. And I noticed that people loved it. And when I did it, they became more comfortable with me because they didn't put me on this pedestal as superhuman. They're like, she's human too. She makes mistakes. Heck yes, I do. And it really became now like, hey, I am just like you guys. Yes, I have all this knowledge, but I'm a human and I have to work at it every day, right? I can help you work at it too. So it just became easier and easier for me to say, I am not so good at X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to become better. And I loved it. And all of a sudden I started feeling more confident and comfortable with myself, accepting who I am for what I am.
Two things that come to mind. One is, I think people, when they fear of awareness, they fear that when they found out the truth, that what they know is not what they actually know, that it may be different. It makes them ask the question of, who am I? And they don't have that attachment to the things or the knowledge who makes them who they are. And self-awareness takes you on this vulnerable journey where you have to remove yourself from who you are and what you know. And at some points, you may be in the positions of you have no idea who you are. And then you have to rebuild. What does that mean? And I think the second point, which is continuation of this, what you said is, which you started to own that. I think it's so beautiful. And I think that what makes it today is that's a strong connector, because you're saying, like you said, I'm a human and I'm just telling what's happening inside of me. And then other people feeling that it's okay. They also have flaws, and that is okay. And you calling it, give them the permission for them to as well share that they also have flaws. And I think that is beautiful. I have something that with my clients, I call set the truth free. That's a thing that I use often. And I tell them, set the truth free. If you with a colleague, if you're with your partner, if you are in a sales presentation, or even if you do keynotes and there's millions of people, if something happens, set the truth free. Sometimes we all lie, right? Sometimes I lie. You ask me a question and I tell you something, and I realize in the moment that I don't have the facts straight and I'm BSing. I will literally, and people know me for that, I would say, hold on, I'm lying right now. And then I will correct myself. And that's a gift that I'm giving and a gift that I'm receiving as well, because when I open myself up and I'm telling that I'm lying, it's okay to correct yourself. And I see such a huge difference immediately with those people. Immediately, our rapport goes to a whole different level and it becomes so easy. And I think that's what you did with your humor. And I think it's such a gift for people to use it in the business world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How would people, do you think, what are the different ways they can do that?
So first, stop thinking that you're going to get judged. People are not always judging you. And I think a lot of times we will avoid, admitting something or admitting a fault or saying, hold on, I can say that better. I can say that differently, because we feel like we're going to get judged by the other person. And if we're judged, maybe they won't, think of us as an expert in something, or maybe they won't want to work with us, or they'll think less of us. Put that thought out of your head. If you come clean with people and you're honest with yourself and you're honest with other people, they will appreciate that. What human being wouldn't, right? And so just stop worrying about being judged, because you're worrying about something that is in the future that maybe will never happen. And so why waste your time and energy? And it's just going to vortex you into these negative thoughts. Instead, change your thought and think, I'm going to be honest right now. And this person is going to be so appreciative. This person's going to see me as a human. We're going to connect and they're going to feel safe around me. They're going to start to trust me because I have the courage to say, I just made a mistake. Hold on, that's not the right figure. Let me be honest with you. And now, because of that, because they see my courage, now it makes me feel and look confident. Confidence attracts, and all of a sudden I have the trust of that person.
Yeah. Another question I have follow up of something that you said before, where you have to adjust to the person in front of you. Mm-hmm. And we hear a lot of people in our industry talk about it, because you do have to do that, right? Often when I talk about it right away, the question and the sentence comes up, after almost every single time is that, well, if I do that, am I no longer my authentic self?
Oh, I hear that
All the time.
all the
All
time,
the time.
all the time.
And so I have my way of explaining it, but I would love to hear your thoughts about that, of when individual adjust to somebody else and when they think, well, then I'm losing my authentic self.
No, you're not. Here's what you're doing. You're using your knowledge of how to adjust the way you sound and how you're coming across to make that other person feel so comfortable around you, to gain trust, to meet your objective. That is a superpower. So it's not being inauthentic because you have this knowledge to adjust. So I'm an extrovert. If I'm talking to an introvert, maybe I will just chunk and pause my information a little more, avoid my direct eye contact, and maybe tone down my level of excitement and my hand gestures, right? I can change that. I'm being authentic because I know how to change it, and I'm doing it for a purpose. And that purpose is what? It's for the good. That purpose is to make another person feel comfortable. That's pretty awesome. And so there should be no question about authenticity of who you are. If you have the power and the knowledge to make somebody else feel comfortable, why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah. I say you meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the same thing as if you have a person or a friend that is crying, you're not going to start cracking jokes and laugh. Mm-hmm. You're going to meet them where they're at and then work your way and, to a maybe better state for both of you, that where you are today and where they are today, and you'll meet in the middle. But if they're crying and you had a super exciting and you closed millions of contracts and you want to sing and dance, you have to meet your friend where they are. And maybe then you'll come to the middle. But it's the same exact thing. It's not losing who you are. It's building that connection and being empathetic.
Yes. I just wrote an article on LinkedIn, the difference between empathy and sympathy, right? Sympathy separates us. Empathy connects us, because sympathy is saying, I'm sorry for your friend who's crying. And as soon as you say, I'm sorry for you going through this, it's you. I'm not going through it, but you are. So it separates us. It's not a bad thing. There's a time and place for sympathy, which is why we have sympathy cards. But if you truly want to connect with someone, you want to express empathy. And it doesn't mean you have to cry over something you would never cry over. Why would you do that? All you have to do is say an empathetic statement to let that person know you're listening, you're here for them, and you want to understand how they feel. Maybe there's no way you can understand how they feel. Or maybe I would say, you know what? Listening to all of that, I can't even imagine how you're keeping it together. I know I would be a mess. You got some courage. Right. And it's just saying something like that versus, oh, I'm so sorry. Because what does that do for you? Nothing really. If you really want to connect to this person, then you learn how to express empathy in some really good words instead of saying, I'm sorry. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to feel the way they do. Absolutely not. I mean, go back to my interrogations. I was talking to people who said, we deserve 9/11. I'm not going to say that we did. I definitely don't think that, nor will I pretend to, right? But I'll listen to what their passion was. And then I will say, hey, I get passion. You want to know why? Because my passion is finding out when the next attack is. My passion is understanding why you thought we deserved it. So, we could go down a rabbit hole with this, but I just think it's so important that when you're meeting that person, you don't have to cry. You don't have to laugh. You don't have to feel what they're feeling, because that's ridiculous. That's not being, credible. That's not being genuine. But try to put yourself in their shoes by listening to them, by maybe trying to understand how they feel. You don't have to feel what they feel, but try to understand how they feel. And that's the big difference.
I love it. And it's such a great segment to the next question I wanted to ask. Because you worked with different people and different situations and beliefs, Do you have a statement you follow of what truth and what a lie is? For example, Paul Ekman or others, they have statement of what a lie is, what a truth is. And very different than what most people think a truth or a lie is.
Yeah. And it comes down to being honest, right? It's honesty. We have different beliefs, obviously, but the difference between a truth and a lie is based on honesty. Are you honest about the way you feel, how you're thinking, your thoughts, your beliefs, your behaviors, your opinion? Are you honest with the information you're giving me, or are you dishonest? That's the difference. And even if you're honest with, I feel this way, which is against what I would feel or what I believe you would feel, it doesn't matter what I think, right? So, and we have to really push away our biases, because our biases will say, no, that couldn't be right. There's no human that would think that way. Really? But this one does. And they're being honest with you about how they feel. And so our biases can be very, very bad with that, and making us think there's no way that they can think that. And I will tell you a funny little story that happened in class. So when I do my classes in person, we'll usually end on the third or fourth day with this really fun exercise. That the first day, as an icebreaker, I have everybody write 2 stories. One's a truth and one's a lie, right? And there's a whole bunch of parameters that come with it. At the end of the class, I take half of them. We do statement analysis, right? They work in teams. The other half, we put them in the hot seat, we call it, because you start sweating because it's so uncomfortable. And the whole class is around in a fishbowl. And we're asking you questions, trying to figure out which story is the lie. So this one particular individual had written about some crazy fishing, vacation story that sounded really preposterous. And then he wrote about a car accident he had with his pregnant wife. And he said one thing. He's like, when they had the car accident, he got out of the car. His pregnant wife was sitting in the passenger seat, got out of the car and ran to check on the other passengers in the other car first. And everyone's like, absolutely not. You would not do that. That's the lie, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, and so I play along. I don't know which is which. I'm like, no, that's the honest truth. Honestly, that's what he did. And so, but our bias is, you couldn't do that with your pregnant wife. Why would you check on a stranger first? So they automatically went with that. And I'm like, are you kidding? Did you not hear the first story? Yeah. And all of the lies? And he couldn't even answer, all the indicators of deception. But I'm like, I'm not going to say anything, and I'm just going to let it ride. So I said, okay, will you please tell us which story is the lie and the truth? He's like, yeah, the car accident's the truth. And everyone's like, no way, no way. And then he's like, listen, that's what I chose to do because my wife said, I'm fine, go check on them. Right? And so we can miss this one little piece of the story. And because of our biases, that can't happen. We start to believe a truth is a lie when it's not. And that can be very, very dangerous. So again, I always go back to get the information. Dig for the information that comes in a conversation to be able to make the decision as to whether or not you're going to trust somebody. And then, of course, when you can create that environment where people feel so comfortable with you, they will be honest with you. And so then it's not a guessing game anymore. And you don't have to dig for the information because they're going to say, hey, listen, yeah, I lied to you. That wasn't right, but this is the truth. And you may still have to vet that too. But, and so that's why I always call it this recipe of ingredients to use to persuade people to want to be honest with us, and then how to vet that information to make sure it's truthful. But if we stop the biases, we can start to increase our awareness and look at information objectively rather than subjectively, and run it against what we, right, and like what Lena believes is right and wrong. Well, who's to tell? Because you could think completely different from me. And so we just want to make sure that we don't jump the gun to automatically assuming that can't be true, because I wouldn't have done that. Well, okay, you wouldn't have, but they did. And so now what?
Lena, we're coming towards the end. I think we can talk for so many hours. Yes. I think we definitely need to have you back.
Absolutely.
Later. I have one last question that I ask everybody on this podcast, and that is, what did you wish you knew, taught in school, that you did not know when you started work or when you grew up?
This whole conversation about self-awareness. Nobody ever, all through grammar school, high school, nothing was mentioned about it. And when you truly know yourself, it allows you to become this master communicator. It allows you to have really great human-to-human interactions. It naturally increases your empathy and emotional intelligence. And I mean, who wouldn't want that? Had I known what I know about myself back in the day, it would have helped me with so many conversations. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And please share with our audience where they can find you.
Yes, you guys can find me. I'm all over social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, just Lena Sisco, Twitter, Instagram. I also have 2 company websites. One is the Congruency Group. And the reason why I named it that is because it's congruent behavior is honest, incongruent not. So the congruencygroup.com. And you can also find me on sectorintel.com as well. That's my other company.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you, listeners, for joining another episode of the Communication Secrets podcast. We are here for you. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat. Leave us some stars. If you got information out of here that you think can help somebody else, please share it. We are here to help you understand yourself better and understand how to communicate and connect better. So share it, subscribe, and we'll see you next month for another episode.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Communication Secrets. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe, comment, and ask your questions, as we always love hearing from you. Make sure to share this podcast with others, leave a review, and click that subscribe button to get notified on the upcoming episode releases. Thanks for supporting us in our mission. See you next time.